Hello and welcome to Meet a Columban. I'm your host, Father Jim Mulroney, and my guest for this episode is Father Paul Glynn from the Philippines. Now, we met Paul on a previous occasion when he talked with us about the coming of the faith to the Philippines exactly 500 years ago this year. But this time, we want to talk about a different aspect of faith that has been bequeathed to the Philippines. There were many good and positive dynamics came out of it, but also the problems which have involved. Now, when Paul first arrived in the country, he went to Mindanao, the most southern province, which at that time, and even still today, was an area full of great tension between the Christian population and the Muslim population. So that was your introduction, basically, to the Philippines, Paul. And you involved yourself in the work of trying to promote positive relationships between Christian people and Muslim people. So could you tell us something about the way in which you went about that?
Actually, I just followed on the footsteps of other Columbans who went before me. Two Columbans actually gave their lives working in the area of Muslim-Christian relations, Father Martin Dempsey in 1970 and Father Rufus Halley in 2001. They were both shot dead by, bandits, people involved in kidnapping and other sort of, other sorts of things. I suppose just a little bit of background to Muslim-Christian relations in the Philippines. As you said, when the Spanish arrived, they brought Christianity, but they also brought a lot of baggage. It was shortly after they had expelled the Moors, the Muslims from Spain, and established the Spanish kingdom. And actually, when the Spanish arrived in the Philippines, they saw there were Muslims there, and they called them Moros or Moors. They sort of just associated them as being the same as Moors. So there was a very strong anti-Muslim thing among the Spanish. And when we talk about the Spanish Inquisition, it was unique in that there were as many Muslims and Jews burnt at the stake by the Spanish Inquisition as there were heretical Protestants. So basically, under the Spanish era, you were a Filipino if you were a baptized Catholic, and if you weren't a baptized Catholic, you weren't a Filipino. In the 20th century, the early 20th century, when the Americans arrived, one of the things they did was to repopulate Mindanao, and it was majority Muslim and tribal people. So they encouraged Christians from the middle and north of the country to move south to Mindanao and to set up homesteads. So when the Americans did a census of population in the year 1903, Muslims were about 40% of the population. Tribal people were nearly 50% of the population, and Christians were 10% of the population. Now Christians in Mindanao are 90% of the population. So it just shows that the Muslim lands were encroached upon, taken from them, and also the tribal people. So that's really the root of misunderstanding and conflict between Muslims, Christians, and tribal groups, indigenous groups in Mindanao. That the indigenous groups and the Muslim groups have had their lands taken from them, and the government tends to side with the Christian majority because the government in Manila is of that Christian majority. So there's been a lot of tension and war over the years because of all of this, as one would imagine.
So what approach do you take to trying to mend the rift or cross the chasm which has appeared between these two groups of people?
It's almost like in St. John's Gospel when, Jesus met the woman at the well, and John has a throwaway line between Jews and Samaritans, they have nothing in common. It has developed to a level of almost people having nothing in common, Muslims and Christians having nothing in common. The Christians speak one language, the Muslims speak a different language, and there's very little interaction between both groups. So what Columbans have done over the years, and I continued that tradition, was to learn the Muslim language and then spend a few years living with a Muslim family in a Muslim village to learn their culture, learn their language, and then we talk about being a bridge of reconciliation between Christians and Muslims. So I know the Muslim culture and the Muslim language, so I can relay that to Christians and vice versa. So we're sort of like a conduit or a sort of a bridge building the two communities. For many years, I've also been involved. We set up a peace building group. We were actually trained by personnel from the Uniting Church in Australia to conduct peace building workshops. So we have a team of Christians and Muslims working together as a team, conducting highly interactive peace building workshops with lots of games and reflection and almost like a peace camp type thing for communities living in areas of conflict, you know, in areas where there might be a particular misunderstanding or conflict between Muslims and Christians. We offer these workshops, and they have been very successful because they're highly interactive and people don't really need to be educated or having graduated from school or anything in order to be able to take part. And so this is one way of trying to do that, to build trust between two communities that have very little in common and have mutual fear and disrespect for each other.
Now, these points of conflict, are they faith-based, land-based, livelihood-based, or a mixture of several different dynamics?
Mixture of several different dynamics. There could be intercultural misunderstanding because Christians don't understand Muslims, Muslims don't understand Christians. It could be as simple as a Christian boy falling in love with a Muslim girl or the other way around, and then sort of not understanding the taboos in the particular culture, that sort of thing. But at its root, it's very much land. Muslims resent that they had big tracts of land in the past, and now that it's in the hands of what is now the majority Christian. And you have situations where Muslims are not, you know, they apply for jobs and they're discriminated against, or maybe certain schools where it's majority Christian, they don't want Muslim kids going there on the assumption that they're going to be ruffians and they're going to cause trouble and all that sort of thing. So the usual sort of interethnic, interracial disputes, I think, that occur in many parts of the world.
Now, I've heard Filipinos from Mindanao, you know, say things like, be careful of those Muslims, they're bad people, or they're violent people. And I presume Christians have a few nasty things that they tend to say about Muslims. Do you have any examples of that sort of saying? I'm sure you've got plenty.
I could keep you all day on it. One of the standard ones, you know, when I was growing up, we had the booty man or the bogeyman outside. You know, don't go outside the house, the bogeyman will get you. The standard one here in the Philippines among parents, you know, disciplining their kids, you know, at night, don't go outside the door. The Muslim will get you. He'll put you into a sack. He'll bring you to Marawi, which is the center of the Muslim world. He'll bring you to Marawi and he'll make you plant garlic or ginger or turmeric. and that's what you'll have to do for the rest of your life. So the Muslim is seen almost as this sort of like the witch or the boogeyman. It has those connotations. And a lot of that, I think, goes back to the Spanish era. Colonizers do their job best when they tell the people they're colonizing that they have an enemy, that only the colonizers can protect them. So we're the only people who can protect you from those awful Muslims. So that's why you need to support us, your colonizers. So I think that's where it all began. So it became folklore. So Muslims are traders, Muslims will put you into a sack and, take you away. It's almost like Grimm's fairy tales at this stage.
The Muslim people have any similar perspectives as regards the Christians?
The Muslim perspective on the Christians normally is that Christians are land grabbers, and you cannot trust Christians because they'll accuse you of something and hand you over to the military and have you dealt with and things like that. It's more on that level. It's a little bit more sort of based on reality.
So in terms of trying to promote positive relationships, you seem to be starting a fair way behind the 8 ball. But obviously, you've received enough encouragement to keep going for a number of years. So there must be examples of maybe conversions, not the right word, but formation of positive relationships between some groups of Muslims and Christians?
In some ways, Jim, because it's almost at the level of Grimm's fairy tales for a lot of people, that when we organize peace building workshops where ordinary Christians and ordinary Muslims actually get to meet each other and sit down and talk to each other, the fairy tale thing sort of, melts away very quickly. And they realize that it has very little more substance than fairy tale. So it's sort of, in some levels, it's not as difficult as it sounds. It's more difficult in a situation where you actually have, say a situation where a Muslim boy and a Muslim girl fall in love and the parents of both sides are sort of at each other and all that sort of thing. That can be much more complex, but just sort of getting people to look at the prejudices that they have inherited can be a lot easier actually once they realize that they've been fed fairy tales.
Yeah, I think you don't have to go to the Philippines to find examples of that. I think we can see that in pretty well any country in the world.
Yeah.
Moving forward, how do you foresee, in a hopeful manner, what kind of community would you like to see develop in Mindanao?
I would like to see a community where Christians and Muslims respect each other. But I do see microcosms of that. And for the last few years, I and other Columbans in Cagayan de Oro City, we have an interfaith forum. It's an informal gathering of Christian, Catholic, Protestant, and Muslim leaders in the city. And we have built up a very good friendship and solidarity, and we've gotten to know each other very well. And it's great in that all the major Christian and Muslim leaders in the city are involved in this group, and it's also recognized by the local city government and everything like that. So one thing I'm convinced about, and one thing I think I can see it happening, is when ordinary people see the local imams and bishops and priests and pastors working together, doing things together, organizing things together, laughing together, enjoying each other's company, that does have a trickle-down effect, because they all go back to their communities, and they spread that message, and that is increasing a lot more. And I notice at national level now, some of the archbishops and bishops from other parts of the country, from parts of the country where there are very few Muslims, they're also talking about the importance of Muslims and Christians and other people working together. And an example, recently we have the synod process going on at the moment. I know in the Diocese of Pagadian, at the opening of the synod, they invited one of the local Muslim speakers to give an address about what they might have to offer the Catholic Church as it begins its synod process. So that level is increasing a lot. There's much more awareness of the need for dialogue between Christians and Muslims, Muslims and Christians.
Is this work, I know it's challenging, is it enjoyable?
Yes. I think the happiest years of my life actually were living in that with the Muslim family in that small village in, you know, in the heart of Muslim Mindanao. There were a few Christians living in pockets of Christians living in a few villages, sort of within about 10 kilometers walk from where I was living. So I used to walk to those villages as well and say mass in the various chapels on Sunday. When I say chapels, they were like little straw huts, really, you know. And so I built up a very good relationship with the Muslim community there and also with the Christian community. It was by the sea. We had lovely fresh seafood. It was nice. There was always that level that somewhere in the background there might be some skirmish or something, but it was relatively peaceful.
Well, we know life on the missions, Paul, is pretty tough. So it's good to see that you're able to make some fun out of it.
Yeah.
And how do you image your future? I know your immediate future is probably being locked in the house due to COVID-19, but there should be a long-term future somewhere along the line.
There is so much to do in Mindanao in terms of building bridges, reconciliation, harmony, cooperation between Christians, Muslims, indigenous peoples. And I think Muslims, Christians, indigenous peoples working together to help preserve the environment in Mindanao and help reforest the rainforests in Mindanao and all these things. There's so much can be done and so much needs to be done. And actually, when you say, do I enjoy it? I could think of nothing better to be doing than that.
Well, good. I think that's a hopeful and joyful note to finish up on, Paul. And thank you so much for giving us your time and coming to share something about your story with us.
Thank you very much, Jim. And thank you to anybody who may be listening.
Yeah.
Thank you. God bless.
Been talking to Paul Glynn in the Philippines, and I'm Jim Mulroney.